My name is Bob Liff, and this is the CUNY Forum, a town meeting that brings prominent New Yorkers together with faculty and students of the Edward T. Rogowski Internship Program in Government and Public Affairs. As we near the presidential election, the very structure of our politics has been under attack, and as Republicans leading that charge, even though they have benefited from the ultimate presidential tipping of the scale, the Electoral College. Democrats carried the popular vote in 7 of the last presidential elections, but in both 2000 and 2016, Republicans carried the Electoral College and took the White House. Now, whether it's voter suppression or fantasies of non-citizens voting, which is not happening, the very franchise itself could be affected by the results next month. While a wave of disaffected Republicans have endorsed Democrat Kamala Harris, Democrats face defections of their own, largely focused on frustration with the failure of ceasefire negotiations and Israel's widening war with Hamas and Hezbollah. That could come into play, especially in Michigan, with a large Arab and Muslim population. Here in New York, Republicans rebuffed a national Democratic wave in the 2022 midterms and won congressional seats on Long Island and in the Hudson Valley. Democrats are trying to take some of those seats back, which would be key to retaking the House of Representatives and making Brooklyn's Hakeem Jeffries Speaker of the House. College students, whether they realize it or not, have a large stake in this year's election, since they will be living with the consequences. Will they vote? Will that prove critical in swing states and swing congressional districts? We're here with 4 New Yorkers to talk about the stakes in the election. Laird Bergad is a distinguished professor of history and director of the Center for Latin American, Caribbean, and Latino Studies at the CUNY Graduate Center. Keena Lipsitz is associate professor in political science at Queens College and the Graduate Center. Robert George was a member of the editorial boards of the Daily News and Bloomberg News. And Gerson Borrero is a veteran commentator on politics, former editor of El Diario, and currently a pundit on New York 1 News and NY1 Noticias. Gerson, let me start with you. We always say, we've been around a long time, we've always said that the stakes in this election are the highest it's ever been. I have a feeling this year the stakes aren't that high.
This will be the 14th presidential election in which I vote for. I always remember the first one. I voted for George McGovern against Richard Nixon. They really whipped us.
So did I.
You get to a point that you sort of get used to this whole thing. Gas prices are high, the food is too expensive, rents should be lower. I've heard it all. It's a cycle of these things recycled by both parties. Therefore, I've become an independent. I am one of those, persons that actually looks at candidacies and tries to make the right decision. Most of the time, I, wind up voting for losers. But the fact is that, well, it's the way you think. You analyze it. I hate the party structures of both parties. I think that they're all full of, what. And so, but now, there is a clear difference, and there is a generational difference, which I just love the fact that I voted for the first black president, but I'm going to vote for the second black person who happens to be a woman. I'm just so excited by just that alone, and I'm seeing a different Kamala Harris. So what's at stake here is that women have become I have a daughter, and she's entitled to better rights than, all of us were, and our partners have been. So that is moving me. So I don't have, there's a lot of guys older, in the 70s that are saying, you know what, let's go with that. And there's some policies that Kamala has improved on. She's not perfect by any chance. But the fact is that what's at stake here really is being told by the parties. And I think the candidates, there's no better choice here to make than, a felon, a sexual predator, a guy who's a thief and a continuous liar, and this person who was a prosecutor. So I'm going to say what my son, 26-year-old son, told me. He said, Dad, you know what? I wasn't going to vote, but I'm going to go for the cop. I'll go for the cop this time.
So, Robert, this election has played out. I mean, Harris has been almost a boring traditional Democratic candidate in some ways, and the Trump campaign has been playing a very bizarre identity politics game. Most recently, we've seen it in the demonizing of Haitian immigrants, legal Haitian immigrants. I mean, you're an immigrant. You understand this.
That's exactly right. I was born in Trinidad. though apparently, according to Donald Trump, I turned black recently. So you know how these things are. Donald Trump, when he introduced himself on the presidential stage in 2015, he leaned in on immigration rhetoric and very repugnant statements about Mexicans and so forth. And they're doubling down, and he seems to be doubling down on that as his main focus in the most recent weeks, focusing on the controversies that he and J.D. Vance primarily drummed up in Springfield, Ohio. As you said, the Haitian migrants who are there came through a program called Temporary Protected Status, which was passed by Congress, I think 30 years ago, and Haitians were deemed eligible under Obama, continued under Trump. In fact, most of the migrants that are in Ohio now came in under when Donald Trump was president. So it's like, even if it was an illegitimate issue, or they shouldn't have been there, they were there under his watch, and now he's trying to make political hay out of the fact that they're working legally, and they're just creating these urban legends and fantastical stories about them.
He also, Laird, they also pointed to Charleroi, Pennsylvania. You're from the Pittsburgh area. That they said that there was like 40 times the population, which would have made Charleroi a town of 4,000 people, 100,000 people. But at the same time, they have made inroads. The Republicans have made inroads in what have been traditionally Democratic constituencies, most importantly, Latinos. And you've looked at this, at the increase in Republican voting among Latino voters, and that's pretty significant.
Well, let's back up a second. I think that the election, like all elections, will turn on turnout rates among constituencies, Democratic and Republican constituencies. And here's where Democrats are behind the eight ball. Because if we look at participation rates, in other words, what percentage of eligible voters actually vote? If we look at non-Hispanic whites, over 70% of eligible non-Hispanic white voters voted in 2020. If we look at Latinos, for the very first time in U.S. elections, more than 50% of Latinos voted, eligible voters. We're talking about the electorate here. Now, Latinos are the lowest race ethnic groups in terms of participation rates.
That's correct. Prior
Prior to 2020, less than 50% of all eligible Latino voters voted. 2020 is the very first time that more than 50%. If we look at Asians, it hovers around 55 to 60% participation rate. That is who people cast votes. If we look at African Americans, about 60% of eligible African Americans voted in 2020. So the real issue here is, are Democratic constituencies going to turn out at higher rates and thus throw the election to Kamala? One other point I want to make, age structures. The lowest participation rates are people between the ages of 18 and 24. The second lowest participation rates are people between the ages of 25 and 29. When we look at Latino voters in particular, it is skewed toward younger voters. In other words, non-Hispanic whites are older voters, Latinos are younger voters, and that is about the same situation with Asians, not so much with non-Hispanic blacks or African Americans. So will young people, we hear this over and again, right, that young people are backing Harris, will they register to vote? One more thing before I finish. All voter participation rates really depend on registration rates. If people aren't registered to vote, they can't vote. The lowest registration rates are among Latinos in the United States. And so oftentimes I work in the Bronx at Lehman College. I teach undergraduates. Many years, many elections, I've said, do you all know when the deadline to register to vote is? very few people even knew about that. So I think these are some of the obstacles that Democrats face.
Yeah, even if people want to vote, there's been a concerted effort to limit the franchise in ways that, frankly, are shocking to the civic consciousness if we don't go back that few years. We talked a little bit about the Electoral College, which contains its own bias. But we've seen in Georgia, in Arizona, in a number of states where you've had, and we saw it in 2020 when Trump continues to say that the election was stolen. Now you see the fruits of a lot of those kind of Republican, I guess they are in control of the Republican Party, efforts to kind of limit the franchise, cut people off the rolls. The rules can be a club in this situation.
Yeah, so what we're seeing are, I think a lot of this is just designed to undermine faith in the system and in the electoral process. So you're seeing a lot of, I don't want to call them nuisance lawsuits, but they probably won't go anywhere. There are attempts to throw people off the voter rolls because they're allegedly non-citizens. So like the biggest effort has been in North Carolina, where they've tried to get 225,000 people off the rolls who they say didn't have proper identification. What really probably has happened there is these are people who registered to vote before 2002, when the Help America Vote Act actually started to require those kinds of things. And so it'll probably get thrown out. But we've seen changes in mail-in, all kinds of laws having to do with mail-in ballots, getting rid of drop boxes. Two states, North Carolina and Iowa, have just said that they're not going to, if a mail-in ballot, even if it's postmarked before the election, if it arrives after the election, it won't be accepted. And then we're seeing some other very strange things, and they're happening, unfortunately, like in one place, Georgia, where the State Board of Elections, which has a majority that's they're Trump loyalists.
Election deniers.
Yes, election deniers, yes. They have done two things. They've given local officials discretion over whether or not to certify the results. So usually that is just a pro forma thing where you canvass, you review the votes, then you just say this is how many went this way and how many went that way. You certify the votes. But now what's happened is if there are any irregularities, a local election official might decide not to certify the vote.
But I'm going to just stay with this for one second. In Georgia in 2020, it was a Republican Secretary of State and it was a Republican governor who understood what the Constitution meant and what their job was, and they would not let it be stolen. And so the question is...
Earning the undying enmity of Donald Trump.
Right.
The
Continuing continuing enmity. And I think the other aspect that that these Trump loyalists are doing down in Georgia is, I think this came out just recently, that they are demanding that all the ballots be counted by hand. As opposed to the machine. Now, the irony here is Donald Trump was the one who was saying, well, the vote should be the vote should be counted on election day. We need certainty. Blah blah blah. The counting by hand is going to extend the counting process, which, in a sense, basically gives them a double bite at the apple. It increases the possibility of errors, and then it also allows Trump loyalists to say, why is it taking so long? Why is it taking so long?
Well, it also allows poll workers to unseal the ballot boxes, which is not normally done unless there's a recount, right? And so that opens up the possibility of not just voter suppression, but like outright voter fraud.
Let me just say the following, that I noticed this is a really terrible way Democrats deal with this whole process of elections. And that is, they wait for years like this to actually become active. If you notice, since 2020 and the loss that Donald Trump faced, he says, in 2024, I'm really going to steal this outright. So they've been working at this. I mean, I'm serious about this. They have a plan. This is why Project 2025 is there. It exists. I mean, I printed out the 809, almost 900 copies. By the way, I called
900 pages, right?
Pages, not copies. I called the Heritage Foundation and I actually then asked for a copy in Spanish. The woman just wanted to come to the phone and grab me by the neck. I mean, you know, just to mess with them. So, but the serious point is, well, that's what you do to these people. It drives them crazy. No, we don't have it in Spanish. Oh, tú no hablas español. Well, I'm sorry, sir. We only speak English here. I mean, you just pissed them off. So call them. Have fun with this.
Proyecto Uno 2025.
Proyecto 2025. Can you send me the copy in Spanish? There is no copy. Going back to your point, with regards to Democrats and registering voters, this is, Bob, you've been this. You've covered politics here in New York City. This is intended by those that are in power, Latinos and Latinas, Puerto Ricans, a lot of them from the old school. Some of them, you know, they're no longer in office because they wanted to control the vote. So that since it's a one-party town, why register voters? Do you see what I'm saying, where I'm going here? And it happens throughout. So the Latino community was the younger people because they were in school, exposed to high schools and universities. They did it because we were so stupid, the leadership that we actually elected, and I called them stupid in their face. They actually were small-minded. So you have now a transition of Puerto Ricans being the dominant group, still voting black, but then you have Dominicans coming in, Colombians are coming in, you have Venezuelans already that are, you know, some of them that are here for a while, that they vote. But it's our leadership. I went to Washington, D.C. last week for the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. We have 42 members of Congress that are Latinas and Latinos. You figure that by now, we at least be with the Black Caucus, a part to that. It happens throughout. It's like we become active. Oh, there's an election. Let's start registering 3 months before. This is stupid the way the Democrats do this.
Oh, well, I agree with you, and it also underscores the point that while we focus on a lot of the things that Republicans are doing in red or purple states, Democrats, in a sense, kind of suppress the vote by registration rules in their states, particularly in New York. There's been some reforms over the last handful of years, but for the longest of time, it's incredibly difficult to register to vote in New York, incredibly difficult to change parties because it sometimes has to be done like a year or so in advance. So that's there. However, there is one area where I will say, just getting to your point about turnout, and this is something I think that where Republicans have kind of fallen down. Donald Trump put his daughter-in-law, Lara Trump, in as chairman of the Republican National Committee. The co-chairman is the former North Carolina party chairman. The thing is, though, and I just in full disclosure, 25 years ago in previous life, I worked at the Republican National Committee, so I still have some memories here. We need a little bit of bipartisan here, Gerson. But
That gives me the hives.
But the point is, traditionally, the parties handle turnout themselves. They work with the local parties to make sure that they know where this precinct is and how many people have voted and so forth. That's not happening at the RNC anymore. Instead,
it's a crime family now.
They're outsourcing this to outside groups, which gives at least on paper the Democrats a stronger edge in terms of being able to identify who those voters are and making sure that they're actually coming out to vote.
You know, it's also the case that when we talk about Black/African American voters, Latino voters, those are very broad categories. And you know, to talk about Cubans and Mexicans and Puerto Ricans and Dominicans, they're very different. And you talk about in this city, you know, when I grew up, black meant American-born blacks, and then you had this big Caribbean influx. Now you have this huge African influx. You know, these are complicated things. And you know, we were talking before the show. I covered the census when I was at New York Newsday, and in 1990, for the first time, Puerto Ricans were less than 50% of the Latino population in New York City, which means immigration's an issue, because immigration is not an issue for Puerto Ricans. But you've also seen the rise of evangelical Christianity and Pentecostal Christianity particularly within the Latino community. And I think that's one of the reasons you've seen this significant increase in Republican support within the Latino community.
I think it's unquestionable, but I think getting back to the so-called Latino vote, there is no such thing as a Latino vote. There are Latinos who vote.
That is correct.
The background of Latinos in Georgia is very different from in Florida or in New York or in Pennsylvania. For example, in Arizona, where Latinos comprise about 25% of the electorate, we're talking about a Mexican origin population. When we talk about Pennsylvania and we look at Philadelphia, we're talking about a Puerto Rican origin population. When we look at Allentown and this corridor in Pennsylvania, which could be decisive in the election, we're talking about a large-scale Dominican presence. And so there's, you know, if either of the political parties are focusing on something called the Latino vote, they're missing the point of diversity.
Well, and in Florida, which you traditionally perceived as a Cuban vote, you have this huge Puerto Rican influx in the I-4 corridor.
And a large influx of Venezuelans too, because of the turmoil.
But they don't. They're probably not citizens.
The difference is that we come here as citizens. Right. So in 1917, we were imposed citizenship, which, by the way, is I do a show on HITN at Studio DC in Spanish National, and my whole thing is that Puerto Ricans, how come you care so much? Because we were imposed citizenship. We didn't have to take the 10 questions that other citizens have to come in. We were imposed citizenship because they needed us for war. They needed us to exploit us. So they was the easiest way. We became citizens. No Puerto Rican was asked. Not that I was born in 1917. Don't you all start thinking these things. But it wound up, and it annoys me because they put up these, you know, false requirements, I call them, because if you're going to impose on 3.5, at that point it was almost 4 million Puerto Ricans, you can impose citizenship, then why you can't, you know, this 10 years, 20 years or whatever. Come on now. People who come here, you at least come up. My whole thing is, and it really annoys me because we have Latino, the 42 representatives that are all Latinos from different parts, Mexicans for the most part. They're not you know, they don't want to solve this immigration problem or the changes, which since Ronald Reagan, we haven't seen any changes in terms of immigration policies. By the way, the whole thing with Haitians in '81, that we can go back to that. The Haitian thing or Haitian hate is not there. And of course, most of it in Latin America is because of the economic policies of you know, the United States and what they do. They complain about Venezuela, but, you know, they couldn't accept an Hugo Chavez and the way he got elected, duly elected. And now they, you know, it's like the trickery and all that. And then we can, oh, Venezuela's gone and we have all the Venezuelans coming in. Well, Simón Bolívar, you know, was in New York 250 years ago. He did come to New York, and he was, and they came by ship at that point. But what I'm saying is that there's so much confusion. You're right, Professor. There is a tremendous difference, and there is no Latino vote. Rubén Gallegos, Arizona, that you mentioned, is actually born in Illinois, Chicago. Listen, Colombian mother, Mexican father, grew up in Chicago, is now in Arizona, about to begin. I think he's going to become the first, you know, senator and increase the numbers of Democrats there. But this is how complex it is in terms of determining what the Latino vote is and who we are.
I would also add on that. One area I think Kamala Harris has, is rather, let's say, cunning in this, or some might say cynical. But in terms of endorsing the very strong border control bill that Trump basically told Republicans to deep six. I mean, it's arguably one of the most conservative border bills in decades, and she's endorsed that partly I think because she realizes that having a progressive or liberal view on immigration is not actually going to attract the Latino vote because there's differences within those communities, and many of them are frustrated about illegal immigration. And when they hear her saying, "Oh, she's going to be tough on the border," it actually opens up the possibility of them wanting to support her as well.
Making immigrants citizens, and by extension, voters, is something that Republicans perceive as very much against their interests.
Yes.
So I mean,
Really?
no, but I mean, but it's very different than, you know, my grandparents came in, and, you know, when my grandparents came in the beginning of the 20th century, which had basically no rules. If you weren't sick, you could get through Ellis Island, and the Democratic Party met you at the boat.
Well,
It's
this is the message that Trump's putting out right now.
because it's an example of hurdles, whether it's for citizens, but especially for immigrants. It's hurdles in the way of voting.
Right. Well, I also think like what's happening right now is Trump, the issues that he's driving home, there are two. He's focusing on jobs and the economy and inflation, right? He's going to bring the tariff, and then it's immigration, and they're stealing your jobs. They're stealing your jobs. And so this is just a natural thing for the Republicans to fall back on. And I don't see, and actually I should say, I have been doing some canvassing. I go to Pennsylvania because I feel like we should go and knock on doors and open the door. We're talking to independents. Those are the two issues that they keep. It's almost like they're parroting the talking points.
Well, you know, besides the ethnic issues, there's the gender issue. And in particular, the degree to which the abortion issue has energized women, suburban women, young people, whether, you know, of whatever gender. It's, you know.
College-educated women have been very much energized by it, but white women without a college degree and unmarried women.
With cats.
Well,
with or without cats.
They are actually leaning towards Trump's making big gains among those groups. And I think it's because of inflation. I think people are not, even though you can tell them that things are improving, they're not feeling it. And they resent it when you tell them that they should be feeling it. We're
almost at this point, though, too, where we don't know, is the cart before the horse before the cart. We've become so polarized on ethnic lines and racial lines and so forth. You sometimes wonder whether those women are hearing this message just because inflation and so forth has impacted them. Or is it because of ethnic and racial loyalties is just making them more open to that message? And
the whole thing with how do you get women? Women don't need to be stimulated to go to the polls. There's plenty of issues. The abortion issue just heightened it, and I think that it's a matter of discussing it among families. It's also in Latino families, for example, there's the religious aspect. Oh, el aborto, no, abortion, that's ungodly, you can't do that. Well, you're not the one that's going to get pregnant. You're not the one that has to go.
It's also generational in Latino families as well as everywhere else.
But again, my age is, I'm 74, and I understand it. I understand it because my mother was a single mother who came a divorced single mother with 2 kids. I'm the oldest of the 2. And I know what she went through. And she had a job in a factory. She sold Avon products and, other products so she could make a decent living. We never were on welfare. Not that there's anything wrong with that. But the point is that if you see this, then think back to that and never mind this religious. You can be religious and everything, but, women have a right to control their own bodies. And it also with medical care, which we just think of abortion. What about the things that for example, I will never have to go to a gynecologist and mainly, well, I'm a male, but I don't know how, this is like crazy for me. No, seriously, this is such an intimate part of having a doctor and field dominated, or used to be, by males. Right. So all these little things we have to really consider. It's what women go through on a monthly basis, periodically, and if you should become pregnant and what's expected of them. So the medical care should be better for them, and we should be more considerate. And it should not be dominated by males. I have nothing to tell my daughter about that, but it's understanding. But what I'm saying is you got to discuss it at home, and you got to stop with the religious bull. That you know,
baloney. Yes.
I forgot where I was, but it's annoying to me because I get it real. And by the way, my father, I'll give you something personal, which is very real for me because I learned it when I was already 19, 20 years old. My father had tried to have his first child because they were very young, 19 and 20. He tried to have me aborted. Can you imagine the world without me? He actually injected stuff into my mother. So I think that these kind of things have to be without my mother's consent. Can you imagine that? So that kind of stuff, that to me is criminal. And I think that we have to discuss these things in families. I do discuss it in my family. I tell them exactly what it is. I have no resentment towards my father. He was just a male chauvinist pig. That's all.
Let me ask, I mean, because you have been, my political club, I belong to a Democratic club, and there's no real politics going on. In the
No, not at all.
No, I mean, there's no elections in doubt. They're sending a bus to Eastern Pennsylvania, and you know, to
Right.
do. I mean,
How does that play?
does the abortion issue factor into people you talk to?
I mean, you can raise the issue there, but I don't think they feel that sense of urgency in Pennsylvania. They don't see it as something that could happen here. I think that's happening in a lot of places. You know, it always comes back to inflation and immigration. You are going to have in 3 states, they're going to have referendums on abortion,
Including Florida.
Florida, I think it's Arizona and Nevada. So these are all the battlegrounds.
And maybe Missouri.
Maybe Montana?
No,
Oh, it's
Is it Montana or Missouri? I mean,
I'm thinking of the
there is a
battleground
in
states.
terms of battleground.
Yeah, I'm thinking about battleground states. So, you know, and then marijuana is also on the ballot, I think,
in Florida. In Florida,
so,
yes.
you know, maybe that might change the electorate or might just end up mobilizing both sides. I don't know.
I just think that Kamala Harris just being in the game is itself by itself, and having an understanding by a potential first woman vice president is enough. And by the way, she's a change candidate from 2020.
She's a much
I
better
did not
candidate.
like her in 2020.
She's a
I
much
actually
better
listened to
candidate.
her now. She's improved, which shows you how intelligent she is, how she's grown. And what I hate is also in the part of the media, Bob, I got to tell you, it's disgusting to hear some of our colleagues just really hound her. And when Trump gets up there for an hour and a half and he talks nonsense and gibberish and repeats lies, and yet no policy positions are exerted. And there's a bias, a sexism. I go back to the sex. I'm sorry. It's not that I'm, trying to be. I just see it. It's so blatant. It's so blatant.
In 2020, and this was actually even before George Floyd, the Democrats were having this internal discussion about criminal justice, and Kamala Harris, I think, felt kind of caught between her background as a prosecutor and the whole idea, bail reform and defund the police and all this other kind of stuff, and I think she had difficulty articulating which way she wanted to lean. I think the progressive movement and the Democrats as a party though has realized that rhetorically they went to excesses at that time, and I think that the Democrats are in a much more amenable place to hear. It's like your son said, I'm going to vote for the cop now. Whereas in 2020 it was oh, Kamala's a cop, and they weren't saying it in a nice way. So I think she's in a better place that way, and that allows her to articulate where she wants to take.
But I just want to point out the fact that it's because he's clear on the choices. He's clear on who Donald Trump is and who Kamala Harris is.
Which is,
so let's be clear on that.
It's a very interesting point, and I'm going to go to a question from one of our students. But I believe, it's not a very idealistic view that in 2016 people rejected Hillary Clinton more than they elected Donald Trump.
Yeah, that's right. I think.
And in 2020, people rejected Donald Trump more than they elected Joe Biden. And in 2024, because of Biden dropping out of the race and this incredible shift in the nominee, Trump becomes the effective incumbent. And my hope is that they're going to reject Donald Trump
Again, yeah.
again. Although I think Harris has been giving people a reason to vote for her. I watched her interview with Stephanie Ruhle, and it was substantive and it was a little boring. And I think that we might really value boring in politics.
No, that'd be great. I value intelligence.
So tell us your name and your campus, please.
Hi, I'm Lily Shahein. I'm from Hunter College. I'm a sophomore, and I have a question regarding climate change.
Yes.
What long-term solutions do the candidates have for supporting communities that are impacted by rising sea levels and flooding? I know during the presidential debate they talked about fracking, but we really didn't see any positive policies.
We're taping this as Hurricane Helene is about to hit Florida with incredible surges. So which is, I believe, very linked to climate change. This is a specific question, and it's a question, especially with Donald Trump in the race, of the degree to which issues are focused on. I mean, climate change is an existential challenge, which college students, especially, are going to live with the consequences of this.
Yeah, I think it's a critical issue, obviously, from all kinds of points of view. I do not think it is an issue that voters are focusing on in this election.
Yeah.
Despite its importance to the world, to us as human beings, it's not something that really motivates a huge portion of the electorate.
Yeah, when you see the issues that are important to voters right now, I was surprised. I was looking at these numbers yesterday. It is at the bottom, and there's so many things that are above it. There's, healthcare, there's education, there's crime. All these things are really weighing on people right now over that, which for better or worse.
So this is one case. I think the British have this phrase, too cute by half. And I think the Democrats ended up being in a smart place in terms of policy, but they tried to get too cute with their marketing. So when the whole idea of the Green New Deal didn't really go anywhere, in 2021, 2022, the Congress managed to get through a bill that put lots of money into climate change issues, but they didn't want to sell it as that because the big issue at the time was inflation. So they passed the bill and they call it the Inflation Reduction Act. It did do something on the margin in terms of inflation, but I think 650, 700 million, close to $750 million was focused on climate change battling initiatives, encouraging
green jobs,
green jobs, encouraging states to invest in green jobs and so forth. But you hardly hear about it.
Yeah.
And I think that's a failure on the White House.
You hardly hear about it. Kamala Harris is talking about it. Yeah. People are talking,
Well, that's how they do.
It's not what she's leaning in on.
Democrats talk. They talk and then they listen to the money.
But they don't promote it as, we passed it.
To your point. By the way, both my daughter and son are Hunter graduates, so you're in the right school.
I'm a Brooklyn College graduate, but we don't.
I'll let you two.
14-year apart difference in age, but they're both them. But to your point, the reason is simple. It's the established Democrats. Now Bob was going to tell me where to talk. I got a big mouth; it'll be heard.
No, I'm worried about where your microphone is.
Okay, so anyway, I just want to address the young lady here. I think that it's because people like you, it's the future. My lungs, I don't know how much longer they're going to last. We're kind of, but I think you have to take it. I think it's a real issue. Democrats don't understand it. They lie about it, not intentionally, because they all think that they're concerned. And I think that you young people, the ones that are concerned, have to come in, get elected to office, and then don't take the money from these disgusting corporations that lie even about recycling plastic. Can you imagine that they've been lying to us all of a sudden with these reports? Oh, now we realize that they can't really, destroy the plastic. So I think that seriously, it's getting into office, young people who are concerned with what the future may hold, what the planet is already, we've messed it up. and taking these corporations out of the game of buying you guys in terms of the lobbyists. It's disgusting, and that's the only reason. And Democrats just talk a good game, including Kamala Harris. And I'm voting for her, but it's all a lie. Don't believe them on this issue. Don't believe them, because they're not going to be around, and this is why they don't care.
Keena made the point that that climate change, which is an existential challenge,
Of course,
to the future of the human race, is very low on opinion polls as to what issue is the most important. I think, and this is kind of a condemnation of the media to a degree, is that the lack of an issue focus, the degree to which the Trump cult, if you will, has redefined public discourse, not for the better, doesn't let us really discuss. I mean, and everybody, a lot of media yells at Kamala Harris, why aren't you doing interviews with us? And, Trump only does interviews with the friendliest of people. So I do think that there's not an equal playing field. I mean, the Times has been trying, they're shifting, they're trying to cover this as, two equal parties. Facts and non-facts are not the same. So
can I say, so in 2016, remember there was this hand-wringing after that election because Trump was able to earn, somebody calculated, like $2 billion worth of free media because the media could not take their eyes off of him, right? And I feel like that's happening again. So
it's not happening as much. Fox is cutting away from his rallies.
Oh no, but when he brings up these issues and maybe he says something outrageous, eventually, basically the New York Times and they all have to weigh in and say, this happened with the Haitian, what happened in Springfield.
Yeah, even talking about even talking about the lies that Trump and Vance say about the Haitian community, even expressing that, it ironically keeps the immigration issue in the voter's mind, and that redounds ultimately to their benefit.
I don't mean to agree.
The immigration issue is in many ways a false issue. About 85% of all Latinos in the United States were born in the United States. They weren't immigrants. When you see Trump going on TV and saying in the debate, millions of immigrants are pouring across the border every month, or I saw a commercial the other night, Harris and Biden have let in 30 million immigrants illegally into this country, when the facts are exactly the opposite of this. Now, the question is, why do people why do Trump supporters, why do Republicans buy into this litany of lies? And the New York Times has no impact on Trump voters, believe me. They don't read it. They watch Fox News, and they repeat what Fox News says. So what is it that makes people so susceptible to this never-ending series of lies about whether Haitians eating dogs and cats or 30 million immigrants? What is it that makes people so angry that they are buying into this?
I think it's very racial. I think it's the decline of the population to where we're going to be, this is one of my bizarro terms, majority-minority country in the not-so-distant future, and that's viewed as a threat.
It's a new America. They don't like it. They don't like that they're going to be a minority, and it's white folks. It's the new America. There will be more mixed. They will have different colors, different nationalities.
It's the great replacement theory. It's the great
We're not
replacement
replacing anybody. I don't want to replace any white. You all contribute. We're going to allow some space for you guys.
Thank you.
But the fact is, by the way, going back to the question,
it's mighty nice of you.
It's also the money, the influence of big corporations into media, which is your point. It isn't just the politicians. I mean, the way they spend the money in media buys and all that, they do influence the coverage. That's another, that's one of those scoundrels that they also, and we're up, listen, it's a business. People forget the media and reporting and newspapers and television stations, radio, which are diminishing the radio stations because they were just throwing out gibberish. I don't have a problem with that. The problem is that we just don't understand that it's all driven by economics and those that have the money, which is why Trump is more dangerous than ever, because he's going to empower those billionaires that don't need any more power.
Except that something Trump will understand, his ratings are down. And so I think that's the degree to which people are paying less attention and people are walking out.
He's been around for 10 years, and his
act is getting
the show has gotten stale, and there's
He's
no
annoying.
There's,
You just
there's
don't
no
want to
new,
look at him. He's
there's,
just
there's no new
disgusting.
there's no new storylines.
That's right.
You know, as bad as you might look at it from a moral or ethical viewpoint, in 2015, Trump was new. He was fresh, and particularly in contrast to Hillary Clinton, who was around for almost 20 years at that point.
The morality level of how serious Democrats take when a person of their party is accused. Case in point, Eric Adams. Do you think that they would do this to Eric Adams? Not that I'm saying that he doesn't have to resign or should resign.
We're taping this on the day of his indictment was
right.
announced. It's not just the show won't air.
So when we don't have, his indictment was announced unsealed and what have you. But Republicans will stick to that scoundrel, as they're calling it. Democrats are jumping just really. Look, you got to resign. You got to resign. Let's burn him at the stake. Republicans. There's a difference in the morality level of these two parties.
Well, yes, except
yes and
that
no.
Look at the Republicans who have jumped ship to endorse Harris. I mean, you're talking about the
That's
people who
now,
are left.
Bob, after
But
2016, 2020.
Gerson, I think we're all old enough to remember. The students aren't, but
Speak for yourself.
we're all old enough to remember. Going back to Bill Clinton, when the notion that the president of the United States had inappropriate relations with an intern and so forth, and there were a number of people calling for his resignation, but the Democrats stood by him. So there are cases where
Because
parties,
that was a case between a married couple, and she tolerated it, and that's part of it. So don't leave that out.
but it was also the president and an intern and so
okay,
forth.
well, that's a
Workplace kind of thing.
Yeah.
But so there is a history where parties often do. If they see it within
They
their
protect
political
their
interest to protect their own.
Democrats do it less.
Let me tell us your name and your campus, please.
Hi, my name's Louisa Opdycke. I'm from the CUNY School of Labor and Urban Studies. And my question's pretty short and to the point. Why is it that black support for Trump is up to
Same thing as
21%?
Latino support.
Yeah.
Why is that?
I'm skeptical of the polls showing that now, because if you go back, in the 20th century, the highest poll number for Republicans in the black community was Richard Nixon in 1960. It's about 33%. The next highest was, of all people, Gerald Ford in 1976, 17%. After that, the average number was somewhere around 11, 12, 13%. When Barack Obama ran, the numbers plunged even further down to like 8% or so. Donald Trump got a little bit of that back in 2016, 2020. Some of the polls suggest that it could be as high as 20%. I don't think that's true. I think you do have, if you carve it out a little bit, African American men may be drawn to Trump for some of the same reasons why white working class men are, and Latino working class. They like his bravado, his or machismo, however you want to call it. However, African American women are still seem to be strongly Democratic, up in the high 90%.
Besides the changes and that came from dictatorships and the recent rise of Venezuelans that was prior to that, the whole thing with how we've treated, the United States has treated this whole thing. But we have a problem as Latinas and Latinos. There's a book out, I'm trying to remember the name, it's recently out. The author is Paola Ramos. Paola Ramos actually explains how complex it is, because you see me here like this color, and most of them, by the way, I don't, when there wasn't a census, and my kids will attest to that, I put myself down as black, because I'm a mestizo at best, and we just have a problem with identity, and it comes back. And Paola Ramos does it in her book. I can't remember that right now. I'm sorry for this. Paola Ramos, and she actually details of how the Spanish influence and that thing of being superior because they came in to conquer, and what were the native people of all the Americas, and let's call them Indians as they used to refer to, that they have this thing, and we tend to, Latinos want to be, identified as white. A lot of us have that problem. And so I think that plays, and the professor can speak more to that we have more comfortable in identifying in this. We actually do it. I've seen Dominicans are very famous for this. They're against Haitians. There's a problem, and you know that.
They share the island.
They have discriminated against Haitians, and they're blacker than the Haitians, some of Haitians. They identify as white. So we do have in the Latino community to answer that they could identify with Trump, because of that. They also come from dictatorships, and they like for example, Dominicans, Trujillo, Rafael Leonidas Trujillo, they like that.
Authoritarian.
The authoritarian people. So they have this thing, and they think that's a better government, because he'll put those people in his place. You fool, they're talking about you. That's the problem. We don't get a full comprehension of that because we think we're white.
But I think another element here is we're too focused on race and ethnicity as determinant factors in political attitudes and voting choices. I think that within the Latino community, there's a great deal of resemblance with the non-Hispanic white community in terms of the issues that are important or not. Mm-hmm. And I think if we're going to address this shift in black males toward republicanism, it's also because it's not a question of race, it's a question of shared issues. Now, I grew up in Western Pennsylvania in the Monongahela River Valley, hardcore Eastern European working class, all right, unionized, all Democratic. Now, this was a time back in the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s where a man got a good job in a steel mill or in a coal mine, unionized, paid, bought a house, paid a mortgage. The woman, it was Ozzie and Harriet, father knows best world, woman stayed at home and worked, and
some of the audience say, Ozzie and Harriet, what are you talking about?
That's right. So what has happened to the children of those working class people, some of whom were black? What has happened to the children and grandchildren? All right, can they afford a house? Can they?
Not on a
on a one-income family? Impossible. No. Even on a two-income family, it's difficult. And so the resentment that's out there among the white working class that votes for Trump spills over to the black working class as well, and to Latino working class. They're facing the same kinds of socioeconomic issues. And I think that is why they're so amenable to this series of lies and distortions. Your real problems aren't structural changes in the economy. Your real problems are these immigrants and these Haitians that are coming in.
It's the other.
And these crazy women who want to have abortions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They're distorting the issues.
And and you've got this irony, particularly is going on in Ohio. The reason why the Haitian migrants came in there is because Springfield, like some of these other towns in Ohio, had become hollowed out. You had the younger generation was leaving because because there were no jobs, and so the Haitians came in and actually filled spots when businesses came in looking for workers, and so it's they were filling a role that was an economic role that was necessary, but now they're being blamed for actually being successful there.
Plus, you add into this what I actually think that the Great Replacement theory is a driving cultural issue, even if people don't express it quite that way. What kinds of areas and we only have about 4 minutes left, what kinds of areas in Pennsylvania were you in? Were they suburban
Bucks County. It was Bucks County, so right across the border, yeah. And so these were suburban, but working class sorts of neighborhoods. And my understanding is also, I've heard from field offices in Philly that there is a lack of engagement and enthusiasm. So
this is even after
when you said the border,
Harris.
you mean the Ohio border or the New Jersey?
This is New Jersey.
New Jersey,
right across,
New Jersey,
yeah,
Pennsylvania.
yeah. So but Harris is eking out a little bit of a lead right in Pennsylvania. So hopefully,
I do think that You have 150 million votes going to happen, and it could be 20,000 votes in a couple of states that actually, and that's goes back to the rules issue. If you can keep those people from voting or get them to vote.
Right, and if you can get Nebraska to give up that one
Yes.
that electoral vote associated with the congressional seat there.
Nebraska, on the Electoral College, Nebraska has its statewide election, and each congressional district assigns one election. Maine is the only other state that does it. Everybody else is.
And there's
Everybody,
and there's a lot of
takes
pressure
everything
in the
in the
Republican Party right now for them to change the rules, even this late in the game, and to say that get rid of that congressional kind of plan and just go to a winner-take-all system.
There's a nightmare scenario, by the way, that right now the swing Republican state senator said that he's not going to allow it. So Nebraska's going to stay the way it is.
Who was a Democrat and switched the Republican Party on the issue
if
of
it did,
abortion.
if it did switch, and a couple of the other, and let's say Arizona and Georgia go to Trump, and Trump actually won the main main one. There is a possibility that the Electoral College could tie at 269, which would throw things into the House, and you'd have real chaos.
It's amazing. From the first time I voted, that I thought my vote counted, which is the problem with some young people voting also, I think. And we're still talking about the damn Electoral College. I used to wear a fro. I mean, I had a big afro. I have no hair now. And we're still talking about the same thing. And we have the damn Electoral College, which makes no sense for me. And we have so many politicians say, we're going to this time, when we get the majority. And Democrats have said this. And now when they have the majority, I've talked to a few people, in prominence in Democrat. I said, well, how about if you actually get the presidency, to keep the presidency, and you get the House to simple, and you increase the majority in the Senate, how about going after the Electoral College?
You have to change an amendment. You have to change the constitutional amendment.
So I think, how many do we have already?
But then you have to get it ratified by 3/4 of the states.
But if you don't try it, you never do it. But that's the problem.
It's not going to happen because the electoral.
See, that's the problem. You see, young people, this is the problem. You got to get your own people in there so they can actually do it.
The electoral college
actually just don't want to try anything
because
we put obstacles without really trying. That's the problem.
The electoral college.
That's the problem.
The electoral college empowers the smaller states.
The rules.
Well, but I'm telling you that's why you're not going to get 3/4 of the states.
How do we know?
To approve it.
Can I say there is an effort right now? It's called the National Popular Vote, where you have state legislatures that are actually saying that they, should you get to enough states signing onto this compact, it's an interstate compact, that if you get to 270 electoral votes, these states will give all of their electoral votes to the popular.
Because it's almost time. Thank you. This was
Popular
very
vote.
spirited. We'll see you next time on CUNY Forum.